Jamie May, to most of you, James May, Jamie May, and I always have fond memories of attending this church as a kid. And I currently serve as the regional director for Congressman Dan Muser, and with redistricting recently, the district now, which starts up at the New York border, comes all the way down to here. And then it goes from here in Luzerne County out to Williamsport, so a huge district. And a lot of what I do in my job is kind of what falls under the normal job description. But I have found that God has opened a lot of doors in that realm that I sort of see myself sometimes as a missionary into the world of politics. And it's just been interesting along the years here, the way that God has opened up various doors to be sort of a salt and a light in that world that really needs a salt and light. And, whether it's a number of years ago, I was working as the director of conservative outreach for Governor Corbett. I remember one day he asked me, he said, every week that they're traveling across the state, they were every weekend in a different location, and they asked if I would be responsible to line up a church for him and Susan, his wife, to go to. And I remember thinking at the time, I said, if you would have told me when I was in Bible college that one of my jobs one day would be to decide what church the next governor goes to, I would have first of all asked you, is that even a real thing? And if it is, what do you major in college? What's the career path that you take to do that? And so there have just been a number of opportunities to give invocations at different events, and sometimes it's something routine like a dinner or things. A couple of weeks ago was for the Bloomsburg Fair, those type of things. Sometimes it's with the president or his family, and so there have been a lot of opportunities there. One of the most significant things that I ever worked on, about 2 years ago, we learned that a pastor up in Susquehanna County, he had been the pastor up there, Drew Corbett, at the Springville Baptist Church, back in the 90s, and his son, who was now in his 40s, was a missionary in Afghanistan. And they had been missionaries over there when the whole Taliban took over in Afghanistan. They moved back to the States. And then about 2.5, 3 years ago, he went back to visit. After stuff kind of calmed down, he went back to visit for a while. Had no issues, went back a second time in August of 2022 and was taken hostage by the Taliban. And so we learned about that because they had lived there in the district. And so we learned about that and the congressman was very focused on doing what we could to help secure his release. And it was just a lot of things that we were doing. We had phone calls with the Prime Minister of Qatar trying to get them to help negotiate his release. And at one point they had me write a letter from the congressman to Ryan with the full knowledge that it was going to be intercepted by the Taliban. And so you write this letter, a Dear Ryan letter, knowing that it's a good chance he won't see it, but the Taliban will read it. And so that sort of fell under the official side of what we were doing. But again, the way that God was opening doors, through that, ended up having a really close relationship with Ryan's mom and dad. And they came up to Washington, D.C. when we met with Senator McConnell and Schumer, and we had some things that we were doing there in D.C., and spent 3 days with them. And along the way, I realized that I was sort of taking off my political hat and putting on a pastoral hat with this dad who is probably in his early 70s. I was pushing him around the Capitol there for about 3 days. And a dad who knows that for 2.5 years, his son has been sitting in a 9x9 prison cell in Afghanistan being tortured by the Taliban. And so had the opportunity to minister and to pray with him sort of in the unofficial capacity. So I say all this to encourage you to please pray for your elected officials. And please pray for us who are staff as well. Just that we will be able to be a light, a salt and light in this world that desperately needs salt and light. One last thing, and it ties in with when you were talking about the EITC program here that the Christian School is doing. This Wednesday, we're going to be doing a prayer breakfast through the Christian School of Our Way. And again, this is not in my official capacity, but God has opened doors here. And for the prayer breakfast, we have Senator Dave McCormick will be there, State Treasurer Stacey Garrity. I actually worked with Stacey before I came on board with Dan. The State Treasurer Stacey Garrity will be there, a couple congressmen, about 15 to 20 state and local officials. We have about 30 pastors coming and about 200 people from the community. And so it'll be an opportunity to share the gospel there with a number of elected officials. And so there are some neat things happening despite a shutdown that's taking place right now and a budget impasse and things. But God is doing some amazing things in the world of politics and government. And so please keep us in your prayers if you would. Before I was doing the political thing, for about 7.5 years, I had the honor of serving as an officer and a chaplain in the United States Army. And during my last 3 years on active duty, I had this very unique privilege of serving in Iraq with soldiers on the front lines. Came back from Iraq and I worked for about 1.5 years at Walter Reed Army Medical Center with soldiers who have been injured. And then while I was at Walter Reed, had the chance to go over and help officiate funerals at Arlington National Cemetery. I didn't do nearly as many as what my dad did, but oftentimes on Friday afternoons, I would go over and help with the funerals there at Arlington. And so while I was on active duty for 7 years, these last 3 years, I really had this opportunity to have a front row seat to witness firsthand the full spectrum of sacrifice that the American soldier has made for our freedom. From the soldier who's on the front lines, away from his family, to the soldier who is injured, lying there in a hospital bed at Walter Reed, to the soldier and his family who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom, I was able to witness this full spectrum of the sacrifice that the American soldier has made for our freedom. And as I look back on those 3 years, I'm reminded of two, and I hesitate to call them lessons because quite frankly, these are two observations that all of us have probably heard all of our life. But for me, it was a new reminder of two important principles. And the first one is this. I was reminded that the freedom that we enjoy is because somebody sacrificed for that freedom. Now, you hear that all the time. You see it on bumper stickers, enjoy your freedom, thank a veteran, and freedom isn't free. And you hear that. But for me, until I began to really see it firsthand, I don't think that I really began to understand and appreciate what freedom and the sacrifice that comes for freedom really looks like. I wish I could take every young person in America today and put them on a bus with me and take them down to Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Even better, take them back into 2003 when I was there, right in the middle of the Iraq War, and have them simply walk around that hospital for one day and to look into the eyes and talk with young men and women who are missing an arm, missing a leg. I wish they could sit there with me, stand there with me in a hospital room alongside a soldier who pulls back the covers and shows me where he has lost both of his legs from the knee down. And he says, "Chaplain, the worst part about this, the most difficult part about this, is now I know I can never go back with my guys in Iraq." I wish you could sit there with me in my office as a young woman comes in and sits down and says, "Chaplain, I'm 29 years old and I'm a widow." She said, I always thought of widows as the nice little old ladies in my grandma's church. And she said, I am 29 years old, and I'm a widow. And she said, every night I come home to an empty house. Every night I make dinner by myself. Every night I watch TV by myself. And every night I go to bed by myself. Because the day that the statue of Saddam Hussein fell in Iraq was the day that my husband was shot and killed. I wish you could stand there with me at Arlington National Cemetery and watch as a woman who is pregnant with twins buries her husband. We hear about the sacrifice that has been made for our freedom. But I think until we really see it, we don't understand how great of a price has been paid for something that we all too often take for granted. Now, I remember one day when I was at the end of my time there at Walter Reed, and I was walking through the hallway, and I was somewhat nostalgic because I was coming to the end of my time in the military. And as I was walking down the hallway this one day, I saw this soldier from the very end of the hallway walking toward me. I was walking toward him, and he was walking toward me. And I could see from a ways off, he just, when you think of an army soldier, whatever picture comes to mind, he was it. He just looked army strong. He had the haircut, he had the build, he had the look. He just, a young 20-something that if you saw him in a restaurant, you would say, that looks like an army soldier right there. But I noticed as he was walking, he was hanging on to this young girl and kind of hobbling his way down the hallway. And I could see from a ways off that he had a prosthetic leg. He had a fake leg from the knee down. And here was this young man, and he was kind of hobbling his way down the hallway. And I just remember looking at him and thinking, what a picture of the sacrifice that has been made for my freedom. I mean, here's this young man who would typically be out riding motorcycles, playing football, pickup basketball, doing whatever young 20-year-olds do. And here he was hanging on to this young girl, just hobbling his way down the hallway. And as we were walking toward each other, I remember just thinking to myself, don't ever forget this picture of the sacrifice that's been made for your freedom. And eventually the two of us would come right up to each other where we'd pass each other in the hall. And as the chaplain, you look over to sort of encourage and smile and whatever you can do to kind of encourage him along the way. And when I looked over at him, I realized that the young girl that he was hanging on to and leading him down the hallway was leading him, but not because of his prosthetic leg. I realized he had lost his leg and both of his eyes. Completely blind. And the two of us passed each other in the hall there, and I literally stopped in the hallway there. And I watched him walk and turn and go around the corner. And when he did, I thought to myself, don't ever, ever forget that picture of the sacrifice that's been made for our freedom. All throughout our nation's history, from the very beginning of our country, throughout all the wars to today, there are men and women today and through our history who have sacrificed for what we oftentimes take for granted. Which leads me to my second observation that I had through these 3 years, and that is that the freedom that we enjoy is an absolutely incredible blessing. Again, those of us that grew up with this, and if this is all we have ever known, probably most of us, this is all we've known. I was literally born in an army hospital, so I've grown up around this my whole life, and we hear about freedom. But until we actually see people who went their entire life without freedom, and what their reaction is when all of a sudden they have freedom, you begin to just have a glimpse into what an incredible blessing freedom is. When I was in Iraq, I was stationed in Mosul. It's actually the modern name of the ancient city of Nineveh. And so we were in Mosul, but just north of us was the Kurdish area. And the Kurds are a group of people who are a different ethnicity than the rest of Iraq. They're part of Iraq, but they're almost a country within a country. And so they have a different ethnicity, different religion, different language, and they're a people to themselves. And they were persecuted horribly under Saddam Hussein. And at one point, we were going into this one little village up in the Kurdish area, and we had a translator who was with us, and he pulled our small little convoy off to the side of the road, and he said, when we go into this little village, you're going to see a cemetery on the side of a hill. Most of the end dates in that cemetery are all the same day. What he was saying to us is we're going into a little town here where a huge portion of this village were all killed on one day when Saddam Hussein's people came in and just wiped out a good portion of this village because of their religion, because of their political views, because of all of the things that we take for granted. He was saying up on this cemetery are a number of people from this village who were all killed in the same day. And I wish somehow I could play for you the picture that I see when I talk about this, because you don't see this on the news very often. When we pulled into this little town, we pulled in, and for some reason it was the kids that started coming out first, began to absolutely swarm our vehicle. I don't know where they came from, but they started running up to our vehicle, almost if they would announce that Taylor Swift was going to be down in Jonestown this afternoon. These kids just started running up to our vehicle. And we got out, and they were surrounding us, and they came up to us, and they started saying, autograph, autograph. Because to a young Iraqi Kurd who has family members buried in that cemetery, who watched their mom or dad or cousin or brother or sister be slaughtered because of their faith, because of their political views, because of their ethnicity, if that's how you grew up, your hero is not a football player or a basketball player or some sports star or movie star. Your hero is the American soldier who brought you freedom. And so these kids came up to us and started tugging on our arm and saying, autograph, autograph. And I have pictures of this at the house. They didn't have pens, so we took pens out of our pocket. They didn't even have paper. So these kids started rolling up their sleeves, and we stood around signing our autograph on these kids' arms because their hero was the American soldier who brought them freedom. On another day, in one of maybe even in the same little town there, we were walking through, and at one point, there were 5 or 6 of us that were walking through, and I had a chaplain assistant with me, and so the chaplain assistant and I decided we were going to stop in this little barber shop and get a haircut. And the barber shop's probably about the size of the stage up here, and so the 2 of us went into this little barber shop, and we're sitting down getting a haircut, and this time it was grown men. They all started walking in. They heard there were 2 American soldiers in this barber shop. And so they started walking in, and they would come in, and either through broken English or through the translator, they would come in and say, thank you for my freedom. And a few more came in and said, thank you for freedom for me and my family. One guy came in and he says, please tell Mr. Bush I said, thank you for my freedom. I said, well, when I see the president, I'll let him know that you said, thank you for your freedom. But they all started cramming into this little barber shop because they heard there were 2 American soldiers there who brought them freedom. And they came in, and one by one, they kept saying, thank you for my freedom. And pretty soon, the room was filled with probably 40 to 50 Iraqi men, Kurdish Iraqi men, who all came into this little tiny barber shop and were squeezed into here, and all of them to say, thank you for my freedom. At one point, I leaned over to my chaplain assistant and I said, do you realize that we're in a room full of Iraqi men and they have razor blades to our neck right now? That don't tell my wife. Now, they were cutting my hair, but I said, don't tell my wife, it's not going to sound very good. But every one of them came in here just to say, thank you for my freedom. As I was sitting there in the barber shop, I remember just looking around at this room packed with these men. I remember just sitting there thinking, what would my life have been like if I had been born as a Kurd in Iraq rather than at Fort Belvoir, Virginia? How different would my life be if I lived their life and they lived my life? And I thought about when we went from Kuwait and crossed the border into Iraq and just the incredible poverty. I mean, watching as our soldiers would throw bottles of water out the window and seeing little kids, 4 and 5-year-old little kids, standing alongside the road begging for food in the middle of nowhere. And thinking about the poverty and thinking about what my life would have been like if I had been born over there. And so we're sitting there getting our hair cut, and I'm thinking about this. And at the end of the haircut, I go to pay for my haircut, and I pull out my wallet, and as a good officer, I offer to pay for my assistant's haircut as well. So I pull $20 out of my wallet to pay for my haircut. I found out later that this would be more money than this barber would make in a month. And I asked people, I say, what would your reaction be if you literally did not know where the food for your next meal was going to come from? You don't know how you're going to buy shoes for your kids or clothes. I mean, we're not talking like you don't know if you're going to get the next iPhone 17. We're talking you don't know where your next meal is going to come from or how you're going to buy clothes or shoes for your family. You don't know where you're going to get the basic necessities of life. And somebody comes along and says, thank you for the haircut. Here's, let's call it $3,000. What would your reaction to that be? You know, my reaction would be I would grab onto that thing, that money so fast. I would grab it. I would run out the door. I would run home to my wife and say, get the kids. We're going down the market. We're going to get something this afternoon. How would you react to that? His reaction was something I hope and pray that I never forget. I went to pay this barber who literally has nothing. And I'm giving him a month's salary for a haircut. And he said to me, he said, no, no, no. You brought me freedom. For you, it's free. And I offered a second time. I said, please, I want you to, I mean, what's $20 to an American? It's not that big of a deal. And I said it a second time. I said, I want you to have this. And he goes, no, you brought freedom for my family and for me. It's free for you. You know, as Americans, I think so often it's so easy to take freedom for granted. And it's so easy for us to forget, first of all, the sacrifice that has been made for our freedom, but to also not fully comprehend what an incredible blessing freedom really is. But I want to share something else with you this morning. And it's from the book of John, chapter 8. Beginning in verse 31, it says, "Then Jesus said to those Jews which believed on him, 'If you continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.' They answered him, 'We are Abraham's seed, and we were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, you shall be made free?' Jesus answered them, 'Verily, verily, I say to you, whoever commits sin is the servant of sin, and the servant abides not in the house forever, but the Son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you are free indeed.'" Do you know it is possible to be sitting in a 9-by-9 prison cell in Afghanistan being held hostage by the Taliban and still be free? Do you know there are people here in the church and in Jonestown and in Pennsylvania who have all of the political freedom in the world, but they're in bondage? Jesus says here that he says you can have all of the political freedom that you can enjoy, but if you are enslaved to sin, you are not really free. And what's interesting is that when we look at political freedom and we look at the sacrifice that has been made for our freedom as Americans, our political freedom as Americans has come because somebody sacrificed for that freedom. But the freedom that we can enjoy as Christians, the freedom from sin, the freedom from addictions, the freedom from whatever it is that sin has us bound to, that freedom as well has been paid and purchased for us by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, God becoming man, coming down and living on earth to pay the sacrifice for our freedom. The freedom that we enjoy as Americans and the freedom that we enjoy as Christians is because somebody paid a price for that freedom. But let me remind us as well that the freedom that we enjoy as Americans, but the freedom that we enjoy as Christians, is an absolutely incredible blessing. And I think for those of us who grew up in the church, and I started going to church 9 months before I was born, probably in this church. And for those of us who grew up in that environment, it's very easy to not fully understand what a blessing it is to have the freedom that comes in Christ as a Christian. And the freedom that we enjoy as Americans is because somebody sacrificed. And the freedom that we enjoy as Christians is because somebody sacrificed. And the freedom that comes is an absolutely incredible blessing as an American and as a Christian. And as Jesus said, if the Son has set you free, you are free indeed. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I think at this time I'm turning it back over to my dad. Thank you so much.